Welcome, folks, to another episode on It Takes a Village podcast. I'm here with somebody who I've been following over the past couple of decades, was heavily involved with youth sport, what was called CIS. He was a rival with the Western Mustangs, but he was quite the athlete and wasn't long after that, he was broadcasting on the sidelines during some of the games through the score. Um, my guest is Donnovan. Donnovan, thank you for joining me on this podcast today.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So I know that there are storytellers, and then there are people who kind of shape the world. But you're one of those people who have had the opportunity to be on the big stage, conversations beyond the scoreboard. You've built a career covering games, capturing moments, chatting with some pretty impressive people through Sportsnet and CBC. Can you kind of go into, I know that's not your whole identity, but can you kind of go into the origin story of Donnovan Bennett and where you are now?
Where to start? I mean, in terms of professionally, as you mentioned, I played football at Western. There wasn't at the time or now, frankly, a huge demand for 5'9", 170-pound Canadian running backs. Professional football, although I love to see that there are more Canadian running backs. Full stop. So I wanted to be part of a team and stay close to sports. And so, media and journalism was the next best thing. Dwayne Ford, who's a mentor who covered the sport at the Score, who also played running back at Western. I reached out to him for some counsel and advice, and he helped me get an internship at the Score, and just kind of took that and ran with it, and was able to start there when I graduated in closed captioning, which is not, the dream, or quite frankly, a role that I would wish on my worst enemy, but it got me in the door and in the building. And then from there, I, you know, would help out and associate produce and, part-time. And then I was booking so many hours doing that it made financial sense for them to make me full-time. And thus, I can, get my teeth cleaned. And then, I got so many stories on the go, and we're running out of hosts to put in the stories. And so, I put myself in some of the stories, and then I'm on air, and it's been a slow build, brick by brick, ever since, in terms of looking for opportunity, seeing where the pain points of the organization or the industry or my boss, quite frankly, were. How could I use some of my naturally given talents and sensibilities to fill those, gain experience while doing that, and kind of working on my weaknesses and making them strengths while leveraging my strengths to get further opportunities. So, um, that career has gone, up, down, sideways. It hasn't been a linear path, certainly, but it has been compound interest in terms of the experiences that I've been able to get, and they inform, the broadcaster and really the person I am now. It's a high level Cole's notes, but um, yeah, it started with me using my experience as a student athlete and as a football player specifically, and going back and helping some of the Scores college football coverage, and even being on air. I wasn't a traditional host or sideline reporter. You know, there was a segment called In the Trenches with Donnovan Bennett, where I would just be, maybe some of your older listeners remember Tony Siragusa on Fox's coverage. He would just be on the sidelines saying what he's seeing in the trenches as a former player. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of knew the league and the players and the personnel. And so I would give the broadcast in the booth some insight as to, what I was seeing from my POV, and use that as my way to say got on air, and then eventually I'd get more comfortable. I would learn the business, and I could, host properly. And eventually, I moved up to doing color in the booth on those broadcasts, and started doing features and learning how to produce those features and learning about production. And so, um, when Sportsnet and Rogers buys the Score, one of the CRTC mandates was they had to also cover university sport. They can just abandon the contract. And so because of this, and they didn't really have any internal youth sports voices, and they had a robust website with a lot of long form content, unlike the Score, they wanted someone to write about youth sports, and I covered it. And so I was like, okay, great. And so I started writing for them, and that gets me into writing. After that season, I started writing about other college sports, and then other, Big Four North American sports. And, next thing you know, I'm writing off the side of my desk, more than I'm doing anything else. And so, um, when my TV career kind of was put on pause, I guess, but it didn't really have a lot of life at Sportsnet because there were just so many other talented people, and they didn't really know what to do with me from a TV aspect.
Mm.
I got a secondment to write for the website, and kind of that reimagined my career there, and that was a bit of a lifeline. At the time, the pivot to video and digital was huge, and so the website wanted some video. And since I had background in TV, I said, "Well, listen, I'll produce some videos for you," and that gets me into doing content, knowing that everything is going online and social. And those videos did so well, and we had a real metric as to if people liked them, because you could see the views. Unlike on TV, you just do a video and you think people like it, but you don't really know
Hmm.
that. Some of those videos end up on TV because we're like, hey, you did an interview with Ronda Rousey. One, how did you get that? And two, like, we should be putting that on TV. And so I've now backdoored my way back onto television in those good graces. So that's all to say that, um, it's been a interesting kind of path and journey, and I wouldn't change it. I didn't have like any nepotism leads into the industry or the business. Um, uh, but I used kind of my experience as an athlete, both in knowing sports and knowing how to cover and handle athletes, but also in understanding, um, how to attack adversity and how to have self-assessment and take critical feedback and apply that into, what ultimately I wanted, and attaining whatever goal that was, whether it was becoming full time or landing a big interview or having my own, video series or whatnot. The same sort of competition you have as an athlete, whether it's, I want to make this team, I want to make dress roster, I want to be higher on the depth chart, I want to start, I want to be a conference all-star, I want to win a championship, all those things I was able to apply to, my broadcasting career, that gave me, maybe a leg up from other people I was competing with in my graduating class.
Just quickly, Donovan, you mentioned Dwayne Ford, but in the kind of the origin uh, part of your career, who helped you get to where you are?
Yeah, so D Ford was huge. You know, Cabral Richards, who I met, um, at the Score, took me under his wing to a certain extent, and someone I had looked up to, and as I don't want to age him too much, not as a kid, but as someone coming up in terms of looking for references and on TV and Canadian media, especially, who looks like me that is doing it. And Cabby was one of the few people I could reference, even though obviously my style is much different than his. And then there was a producer who has since passed by the name of Glenn McDonald. He was the first person who put me on TV,
Mm.
sight unseen, no screen test, no audition. And my first hit was terrible. It was Western McMaster game. So I played for Western. Obviously, I'm familiar with McMaster. And in my first hit, I said the McMaster Mustangs and the Western Marauders, which is just a ridiculous, mistake to make. I was just so nervous. I stumbled and bumbled through it. It was a hit about, Jeremy Hipperson, who was a big recruit for Western in that first recruiting class for Greg Marshall. And it was terrible, but he stuck with me. And by the end of the year, I got much better. And he would be in my ear, encouraging me, and didn't need to take a chance on me at all. But it meant a lot that he gave me an opportunity, but also was an advocate for me within that opportunity, and an ally for me. And so I've told him this many times before he passed, but I'll always be indebted to him, um, because were the ratings going to change for the Score Television Network on Saturdays of Donnovan Bennett, former you know committee running back at Western, wasn't part of the coverage? Of course not. But
Mm.
he really respected that I had a passion for the craft, that I wanted to get better. After we lost in the playoffs in my last year, the Score had the Vanier Cup for the first time, and I drove myself to Ottawa, so across Ontario from London. Barely had enough money to gas up my Acura Integra and get there and back. And we went to dinner afterwards with the Keg. It's like, oh man, I don't know if I have enough money to pay for this meal. It's the only time I went to the Keg and didn't order a steak, and drinking water, just trying to get through. This is before we have apps who could tell me exactly how much money was in my account. I'm just praying that the the machine doesn't come back as decline when I'm paying with my debit card. And after that, I was like, hey, so I helped out them out with their coverage. Hey, I can help you out with the Vanier in Saskatchewan. He's like, really? You can? And in my mind, I'm like, really? Like, what are you talking about? But yeah, I got some money. I got some time, and he's like, we can't pay for you to be out there. The media hotel is full, so you got to find a hotel. It's close, but if you can get out there, we'll use you. And so saved up money, that I had for a spring break trip. Parents helped me, like, with a little bit to top it off. Went out there. And when I say, like, I didn't have any money, I didn't even have a credit card to put the room on. Like, I had to, once I
Wow.
got there, like, for the incidentals, I had to, like, call my mother, and she had to, like, fax her credit card to take, like, the 250 room incidentals.
Wow.
But I was out there, and I learned for that week, like, I saw, not just Cabby and Dwayne Ford, but Tim McAuliffe, Adnan Virk, Sid Seixeiro, Glenn Sheeler, Sarah Lesky, all these people who go on to do amazing things. I saw them work up close, because the Danny Cup was like the Super Bowl for the Score.
Hmm.
And it's not just them. I saw, people behind the scenes. Obviously, the producer I mentioned, Glenn McDonald, but the woman who was directing that game, Dawn Landis, she went on to like be an award-winning director, and she directed this small little thing called The Royal Wedding and its coverage. So like there's people working their way up who are really talented, that I got to see firsthand. So it was a better education than I got in all of university. It was just one of those kind of fork in the road, bet on yourself moments. Um, and so yeah, I was lucky to witness like a lot of the Score talent at the time. But I think what I didn't realize is that they were learning about me and how badly I wanted to not just be in the industry and be good. Because that's the one thing a lot of people said, oh, I want to be on TV. Like, okay, cool. Do you know what that entails? Are you willing to do what it takes? Do you want to be on TV, or do you want to be famous, which are not necessarily the same thing? So I think they gained a lot of respect for my interest in the craft and being a broadcaster, and understanding soups to nuts what that meant. And so that was a little bit of a catalyst for me to get maybe some opportunities that you know I could have gone to anyone at the time.
Hmm. And a little nugget. It was Tim McAuliffe who kind of he didn't get me through the door, but he inquired for me because I saw you in the sidelines in the Yates Cup, Western versus Queens. I'm like, this is super cool. So there was an internship lined up, but I mean, life took other turns, and I'm back here in the West Coast. But I always wonder, what my life would have been if I had stuck with it and stayed in Toronto. But it seems like a super cool, super rewarding career. Um, can we get into, you kind of referenced it earlier, the competitiveness, but can you get into some of the obstacles or barriers that you have faced over the last couple of decades?
Yeah, like in terms of career.
Yeah, personal, professionally, some of the challenges that you had to overcome. I know you mentioned the financial piece and the competitiveness. Are there other aspects that we don't see?
Well, I mean, I would say when I think of my current life, I think the biggest obstacle is just time. Got 2 young kids, a wife that works in the industry. You're constantly triaging how best am I utilizing my time to make sure I'm not shortchanging, this broadcast, this interview, this experience, my family. And so, there sports happen at night and on the weekends when you're generally supposed to be either recharging or spending time with family. So, I think that's a big aspect of it. Um, even back to my university time, like there's lots of times where, out of season, I was covering other sporting events on campus and not necessarily going out and partying with all my friends, but I had this greater vision or plan. So, that sacrifice of time um, i- is a through line and is a big piece. I remember thinking when I started my career, I want to go hard as much as possible now because I just had a sense, even though I didn't really fully understand what it entails, that when I got married and had kids, I'm just not going to have as much disposable time. And I certainly was right. So I felt like I wanted to tack my career almost like I'm a sports person, so all my references are sports, but almost like, you're running a 5K and you won't, when you're fresh off the start, you just want to attack the first couple kilometers of the course and eat up that um, time as much as possible. And then, potentially, hopefully you can coast, home that you're in a good spot. And so I remember thinking like, I really got to grind, put in the 12, 13-hour days and, work weekends and do everything and say yes to everything. Cause I'm just not going to be afforded that opportunity later in life, which is certainly true. So I think that's a big aspect of it. And I think the other one is like media is one of the biggest old boys clubs that we have in our culture. It's generally run by like old white men, rich white men, right? At the time breaking in, I didn't happen to be old, white, or rich, so there's like a lack of connection. And, I've done some work to help bring some other people through. And one of the things I learned, you go through the experience and it just seems like the rules of engagement. It is what it is. And you go through life as a black person and you have to navigate different scenarios. And so it didn't feel or seem any different. You know, one person asked me midway through my career if I thought, race played a factor in opportunities I was and wasn't getting. And there's, sometimes where you can kind of sense and feel it, but, without tangible evidence, there's not much you can really do about it. I had some experiences later where it was, a little bit more um, overt, but my answer to that person was, you know, it's kinda like this ghost that haunts you. It's present, you don't really know, you can't see it, you can't say, like, "I know with certainty in this scenario, race played 33.333
Hmm.
percent factor, in this scenario it was only 15, and this zero zero." Like, this person just actually didn't like my work or me, or didn't think I was a fit, or I'm just not good enough, and, there's some unconscious bias over here. Here, there's just some blatant race, like, you just never know, and so because of that, you almost have to just flush it and say, I'm not going to focus on it. I'm not going to think about it because it's not something I can handle or change. And if anything, make your message. And can I lean into the fact that I've got some diversity and difference and use that maybe to make an impact? One of the biggest stories that helped me in my career is I pitched a Black History Month series when I was at the Score. Something obviously I was unique to be able to tell and produce. The executive at the time Greg Sansoni said, "Oh yeah, sure, cool, go away and do like one story." I did four, one for every week of the month. It was nominated for Gemini. It was called at the time, Canadian
Hmm.
Screen Awards now, and it didn't win, but like the little old the score only had a couple nominations. Like people like critical acclaim, and so it wasn't a sell job the next year to do Black History Month series. It was just an expectation, and so that got me an opportunity, exposure. Um, so there's ways that you can kind of make you know lemonade out of lemons, and I've tried to you know start some mentorship, but also like formal mentorship at Sportsnet. I had a BIPOC mentorship group where I helped kids in their graduating year that were visible minorities navigate some of the unknowns that they were going to face based off their race. So anything from dressing to success, salary negotiations, networking, reels and CVs, makeup, like navigating makeup and lighting, as a person of color, and so brought in industry experts to help them through all of these things, and then, mentored them after the fact. Because what I was learning was when kids were reaching out to me, they weren't asking about like tactical advice. How do I, execute the job? They were asking about some of the soft skills and how do you move in these spaces and navigate these relationships or scenarios, which are things that a lot of their contemporaries got from being again in a media family or legacy family, or they got at the golf course or country club. And so when these in many cases minority kids didn't have access to these spaces, there was a gap in terms of how do they find solutions when they come up to maybe some uncomfortable situations. And so um I was hoping to support, given my experience and my connections in the business, and lead in that way. And I think when people hear of DEI or DEIB or whatever you want to call it initiatives, there's certainly in our current climate a negative connotation. And I think what gets lost in that mentorship program, as an example, is I didn't give anyone a job. Certainly didn't hire anyone based off of quota. But what we hoped to do was, um, when someone is in an opportunity, they're focusing on thriving and not surviving.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I've um, had maybe a different experience than others, but I've used that experience to inform, both the way I cover stories and what stories I cover, but also how I can, be a leader in the space.
Just leading into the next question, like, has your identity or experience shaped the way that you tell stories or showcase people?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly hope so. I think everything about me shapes the way I tell stories, whether that is my experience as an athlete, my age, my faith, my race, certainly now being a father for sure. Um, being the son of immigrants for sure. Like, I think all of that um informs the way I tell stories. And so I think of um who's not being spoken to or addressed, who we're not telling stories for, or what stories we're not telling uh, quite often. um but I also, I would say, because of my race and the fact that there aren't a lot of other you know black people, black men, people of color, whatever category you want to put me under, they're all being true. Because of that, there's almost an ownership of me at times from, let's use the black community. So when people see me, they see themselves in a way, but also when they see me in real life, they feel emboldened to come up and talk to me and tell me about their experience or tell me about a story that I did that resonated with them, or just thank me sometimes for telling stories because other people aren't telling them. And that makes me, in a way, a bit of a walking focus group as to, what's resonating with people and what matters. And so I would say it moving forward, it does inform the stories that I tell. Um, because I have all of these data points that I probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Is there, like you've covered so many stories, you're all over social media. Is there a particular story or person that changed you?
Yeah, so story that changed me would probably be I did um video essay, a letter to my son, um, you know, post George Floyd's death. And um you know, and when George Floyd first, died and the video came out and racial reckoning was starting, I said like I'm not covering this. I felt like it was being uh co-opted. A lot of stuff was disingenuous, and at the time, early on, there wasn't really a sports angle. Now that certainly would change when leagues and teams, like players, stopped playing. But early on, I was convinced otherwise in terms of it being an important story to tell, and if I didn't tell it, someone else was going to tell it not as well, and that there was interest in the story, and so I should you know, capitalize off that to a certain extent. But the angle that I chose, and I shouldn't say it was pitched to me by a producer I was working with at the time, Paul Sadu, who's a really talented guy at Sportsnet. It's just to write a letter to my son about everything that's going on. My son was just around 1 at the time, maybe a little less than 1, and so so um that was the concept, and for whatever reason, it struck a chord and it hit home with a lot of people because I think, like, when you talk about race, people can be exasperated, or when you talk about human rights issues, it can feel like you're telling people to take their medicine in a way, and people just don't like to be talked down to or told what to do. Um so sometimes I feel like with these stories, often you can be preaching to the choir. Someone already knows this or agrees or believes, and that they like the content, but you're not changing any hearts and minds. Um, but with this one, I feel like people's perception changed because it wasn't necessarily about me or George Floyd necessarily, or LeBron James, or whoever. It was about my son, and I think I think many people could maybe connect through, oh, I have a kid, and look at this young little child, and in the father's hopes and dreams for them, but his worries and fears, and I can relate to that in the same way, or maybe these are thoughts and concerns that he has for his child that, well, I don't have for my child, and maybe that there is some privilege there, and so I think by design, just in that it was allowing people to eavesdrop on my perception on the issue via this conversation with my child. um, it disarmed the conversation. I wasn't talking at them or to them or preaching to them. They could understand why I cared about the issue, and that made them care, whether they could relate or not. So I would say, that story would be the one for me.
Getting into the actual tactile piece of it, what are some things that audiences might not understand or see as you're going through, say, an on-air piece or a journalistic piece?
Um, I mean, I would say, just the amount of time that it takes to put it together from concept, storyboard, writing, editing, the editing both of words, if we're talking about, a video essay, or writing of the what we call a paper edit. So the order that things are gonna go in, every shot or piece of film that you see, whether it's, half a second or 5, 6, 7 seconds, is put there strategically and then played with a little bit. The music that is used, whether it's instrumental or lyrical music, getting that music cleared, color correcting it so that it looks good, reformatting it for different platforms. So, its aspect ratio, it works for Instagram relative to YouTube or Twitter or television. Um, and even like the storytelling, right? And will you change that for different mediums? And so, you know, we consume differently. You're scrolling on Instagram. So, what's going to make you stop and continue to watch? And what do you start with on Instagram relative to television, where you're turning a channel on and you may turn it on midway through? Will you be able to understand what's going on quickly and continue to watch, because of it, based off how it's structured? So all of this stuff, takes, hours and hours and hours for every minute of content that you produce. So you want to be intentional about it, because at the end of the day, if you think the topic's important, you want it to find audience and audience to stick around. And there's so many choices for things to consume that you really have to be strategic to make sure what you do stands out.
Given your publicity and your popularity, what keeps you grounded? And I guess a follow-up question to that is, if people are interested in your work, how can they follow you? What's the best way they can follow you?
So at Donnovan Bennett is my handle on everything. IG. Don't really use TikTok, but Twitter certainly. So that's the best way to follow me. And sorry, headphones died, so you broke up at the beginning of your question. What was the other part?
The first part was, given your public face and your popularity, what keeps you grounded?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, I mean, being a public face in a way keeps you grounded, because there's, I talked about the focus group, but you have real live, whether it's comments or interacting people, you have real live experience as to, whether people agree with you, don't agree with you, like the story, didn't like the story. And so when you put something out with your name on it, you kind of have to stand by it. So um, that is can be humbling. And I think the other thing is, um, you know, whether I have a story that wins awards or trends or goes viral, or nobody sees, like, kids don't care at the end of the day when they come in the door, right? They just want you to be present and with them, and they're starting to get into sports, so it can bleed over a little bit, where the day job goes into the night job, but that keeps me grounded, because that's way harder than anything that I'm doing in media, and also much more important. So I would say, that aspect. And then, just by the nature of some of the stuff I've done, a lot of it really matters to people, and how they sometimes feel heard or seen, or shapes views and minds. And so, that certainly motivating factor. I'm not at this point, covering balls and strikes and X's and O's, and box scores in the same way. That's not the type of journalism I'm doing for the most part. There's obviously some of that, but I think when you're talking about issues that really are not just pertaining to sports, you want to make sure you're doing a good job of it and respectful. But at the same time, I also realize that I work in the sandbox of occupations. Like, it gives people an escape. Might be able to have an impact on how people view some issues. But I mm, mm, I just finished binge watching a series on Netflix called Emergency NYC. You know, previous to that, I binge watched a series on Netflix called Critical. This is not a Netflix promo. I just love good, well-produced television. And both of those series are about the trauma units. In Critical is in London, Emergency NYC is in New York City. And the work that the surgeons and the doctors and nurses are doing, you know, on people's worst days. I recently was at a charity fundraiser hosting it for Sunnybrook here in Toronto, in their Tory Trauma Center, and raising money for that. And um, they're a trauma center that 70% of their patients are not from Toronto. They're getting helicoptered in from different areas because people have serious injuries. Like, that's important work, right? Like, literally changing people's lives, if not saving people's lives.
Hmm.
So I am acutely aware that, you know, at the end of the day, what I do is pales in comparison to a lot of occupations in our society, including, education, as I just dropped my kids off at school. And me and my wife talk all the time about how fortunate we are that, we luckily have found a really good school for our kids. Um, but I also know that, like, when I die, whenever that is, they're not going to put, CSA award nominee on my tombstone. Nobody at my funeral is going to be talking about the long form article that I wrote, 2 weeks ago, right? Like, ultimately, you compete, and, serious about the craft, and you really go after it, but you have to put it in perspective in terms of what really matters. And so, as best as I can, I try to remember that. And my wife is great at reminding me, because, I could research, for days and nonstop. And I could be on my phone, making connections and getting background info forever. Um, but, what my kids are going to remember when I'm gone are, the laughs that we had when we were barbecuing for a summer vacation in Crystal Beach and Niagara, right? They're not going to remember that, you know, dad's uh, cool runnings Olympic essay, was well received in the winter of 2026.
Hmm.
Um, I try to keep that front of mind, but when I don't, I have a wife that's really good at reminding
Yeah.
me.
Okay, trying to be cognizant of time here, Donovan. Couple of rapid fire questions for you. First one being, who is your favorite interview?
Favorite interview would have to be Steph Curry, just because it was, a big, white whale for me to land. And he was great, both in the interview and personally. He loves Canadian candy from his time as a kid in Toronto, so I brought him some fuzzy peaches, which he was super excited about. So yeah, that was the one. Like, I would love to interview him again, but um, you know, I've been blessed to interview LeBron and Steph Curry, but Steph Curry would be the one, because I was just such a fan of the person and the player that he is.
So the flip side of that, is there an interview that you completely fumbled or was really nervous for?
Story on something I fumbled or was
You're just too
nervous
good at your job.
for, but you know, along those lines, give you one. I was doing a junket interview, which is basically, um, the interview subject does a bunch of interviews with a bunch of outlets at this same day. They basically sit you in a chair for a day, and they just bring in the different media outlets like cattle. And so, for movies, they'll fly the media into one city and do a bunch of interviews so they all get their coverage at the same time. And they film it for you. They give you, USB with the footage afterwards so that, you don't have to set up cameras, whatever, which is real efficient. And so I did one uh, for a movie called The Way Back with Ben Affleck, who played as alcoholic basketball coach. And so it was a basketball tied story, which is why I was there. But this is one of my first big opportunities to do something like this. And so I was representing both Sportsnet and City News because we can, both Rogers entities killed two birds with one stone, maybe get a little bit more time because of it. And so I had to do a good job because both networks were counting on me. And I went in New York. It's finally it's my time. I'm up in the chair, and Affleck needed some time, and so he asked them to stop recording, and he left and went to his dressing room. So they just said, "Okay, we're going to take lunch now." So I'm like waiting for half an hour for him to come back. So I'm now, as nervous as you are, and I'm just there nervous. And so the way these things work is you sit in the chair, you say your name, your outlet, and then they say, okay, go, and then the clock starts. And you have whatever the pre-negotiated time is, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes it's as little as 2 minutes. And so when Affleck eventually comes back, and I previously said my name and outlet, the time before, but I'm waiting, they're recalibrating cameras or whatnot. This is the year the Raptors were really good, 2019, so they're fighting with the Celtics for top spot in the East. And so as we're waiting to calibrate cameras, I'm just doing small talk with Ben Affleck. He's a Celtics fan, Raptors, Kawhi and whatnot. And I don't realize that, oh no, they're counting this as my interview time. And so I'm kind of looking around, waiting for the cue to go. And then the kind of floor director is like, I was like, oh no, no, no. You didn't say start whatever. And so I'm arguing with her. But now I'm thinking, okay, at some point you just got to punt because you're arguing with her, you're eating up more time. So did a haphazard interview, barely got anything left. Luckily, I was able to call my contact, WB, it was Warner Brothers production, Warner Brothers Canada, and they kind of fought and explained the extenuating circumstances. And I got a couple more minutes later in the day. So I had this 2-part disjointed interview, but I got more time. And even when I left, the actors kind of felt bad, but they're not running the show. And so when I came back and had a second opportunity, they were excited and cheering for me because they knew I was hard done by. But I had to do it quickly, hang around later, almost missed my flight back to Toronto from LaGuardia. But that's one that went off the rails and could have been a lot worse, but we were lucky to salvage what we could.
That's incredible. Okay, last question for you before we sign off. What do you hope people feel after hearing about you and your work?
What I hope people feel about me and my work is that, I suppose I get to talk about sports and be on TV or on social media, but, I'm not really any different than the 23, 24-year-old kid that was trying to get his incidentals taken care of so that he could just work for free for the score for a week. And, I just passionate about sports, passionate about storytelling, passionate about learning, and doing right by the people who have given me opportunities, and really focused on proving my believers right rather than proving my doubters wrong. And I would say, whether it's this industry or another industry, whatever you're pursuing, m- biggest takeaway from my story, I think, is, we all are snowflakes. Like God has made us all individually different. We're all one of ones. We all have intrinsic advantages, whatever that might be. I think the real challenge is figuring out what it is, figuring out how you can leverage it for your benefit, or eventually, once you get into a safe place, the benefit of others. While doing that and leveraging your strengths, work on your weaknesses, be cognizant and self-aware of them, and not uh, discouraged by them. Work on your weaknesses so they become strengths over time. And obviously, continue to grow and check in on yourself, because those intrinsic advantages are going to change over time. And so, some of the things that may have been an advantage for me early are less so now, but, I've had different experiences and had different life um, lessons that put me in a different place to have some um, ways that I can contribute. So, that's been my experience. The Japanese have a principle called ikigai, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. But essentially, it is, um, having the self assessment to understand, what am I naturally good at? What do I like to do, which are not necessarily the same thing. They can be, but they're not necessarily the same. What does the world need more of? And what can I get paid to do? And so if you're really focused on figuring those things out and finding work at the center of those things, then you won't really feel like you're working, but you'll have a great impact and probably great success. And it's a privilege to be able to find something where those four boxes are checked. You'll probably have maybe early on have to have only a couple of them. Thus, you might want to augment some of those other ones with things you do outside of work or in your personal time or whatnot. Um, but that's ultimately the goal that you're striving for. And so, I've been able to really be aware of what that looks like for me, and what maybe some of the things I could take advantage of, and try to use them to stick around in what is a super competitive industry.
Well, with that, Donovan, I know I've been following you the last couple of decades. You've been an inspiration to me, whether you know it or not. And for everybody else, I hope you get a chance to follow him on social media, read some of his work. He's a great human, great inspiration. He has some awesome perspectives on life. Donovan, thank you for joining me this morning.
My pleasure. Appreciate the kind words and the chat. Much appreciated.
Awesome, thank you.